Today on Rise Up, we begin with gratitude as the Faith welcomes the UN Human Rights Committee's decision. The Faith urges continued vigilance to protect the rights of members and vulnerable asylum seekers in Turkey. Next, Brother Zhuang explores the question, what and who are we? Then, Sister Rukhsana reveals how Jesus did send a messenger after all, the riser. After that, believers reflect on what it truly means to obey the man appointed by God. We continue with Medicine of the Mahis, a deep dive into holistic healing of mind, body, and soul, grounded in divine wisdom. And finally, we open the comments section to engage with your thoughts on our lecture series, The School of Divine Mysteries. This is Rise Up.
Very good morning and welcome to Rise Up. I'm Rukhsana.
And I'm James, and God bless you, Dr. Irfan.
Yeah, it's very good to have you here, James. James is filling in, of course, for Sister Alia, who couldn't be here today. But James, we've been talking a lot about the faith, the religion, yes. And you know what it's like. The last time you were here, we spoke about the Nicomachean ethics of Aristotle. Yes. The show is a razzmatazz of different topics, and
of course it is.
Shooting from the hip in many ways.
It's a polymath story. The dawah of the kind of the family Muhammad encompasses all aspects of life. You know, it's about socio-economic reformation of society, just like Jesus came with that methodology when he came to bring liberty to the captives. And so it is a reformation of everything. But in essence, by creating that ideal just state, we create a template where we can grow from roots, germinate that seed and make it that beautiful, full blossoming state where we grow from within to without. And that's a beautiful thing because it means that we are all encompassing. And that is the embodiment of this. And as you say, we spoke a lot about ethics, politics, that Aristotle would talk about all of these subjects.
Yeah, and all of these prophet messengers, James, they had the same kind of goal, didn't they? They wanted to create and build that, like you said, reform society. They were revolutionaries of their time, and the revolution was to see the world from God's perspective and not from the perspective of Iblis, Satan, and the forces of darkness.
Exactly, and when you work from that perspective and you build from within to without, you don't need to almost concern yourselves about what others are doing. You focus on what you're doing, on your mission, your goal. And it seems in the world today, everyone's looking at the other. And we always go back to the statement like Jesus would say, take the plank out of your own eye before looking at the splinter in your brother's.
Right.
When we're always looking at the other and seeking to find problems with the other, it is this divide and rule politics. But when you focus on yourselves, what are we doing to build a just state? What are we doing to build goodness within ourselves? Are we helping our brother and sister? Are we, standing up for human rights? Are we standing up for solidarity of the spirit of humanity? Or are we looking to be a splinter in the work of others? It's very important that we go back to those Nicomachean ethics. And if we do that, like the Imam would say, there is no point in this knowledge, this wisdom, unless we have discipline. So we have to have that morals and manners and goodness, because if you give knowledge to people that are not disciplined, it's very dangerous.
Yeah, and we had Professor Holly Folks, who was here, and she was talking about this balance that Abba Sadiq has managed to build within the community, where there is that discipline on the one hand, but also a freedom within that discipline. There is that balance between not having the string too tightly wound and not having it too lax.
I think this is so beautiful.
And she used some beautiful terms. She said, we're not too loosey-goosey.
I heard her, yeah.
And on the same side, we're not too intense in our disciplinarianisms, which allows us to play that perfect music. And the only way that's possible is because we have with us a personality who in this time is reflecting God's spirit on earth, as you said.
Exactly, and he knows when to pull the cord and tighten the cord slightly. You know, it's a bit like on a guitar. It makes you think you have to tighten it sometimes to get the right acoustics, the right notes, and it depends on what he requires at that time. And he's also referred to the concept of the beehive, which is very beautiful for me, and that we are truly so supposed to be like the bees in the hive, and we know that you have a queen or you have an exemplary monarch figure that represents that hive, and that is the one that produces the pheromones to indicate how the bees should be operating.
And what happens when you take the queen bee or queen ant out of the equation? What happens then?
You have absolute chaos, and you have all the bees running around, and some are building, some are supposedly helping, hunting, but then if they all go hunting and no one's building, then you have a lot of food, but you have no hive to share that amongst them. And then if there's a storm, where is everybody going to survive? You know, so everything breaks down if you don't have someone who's an archetype who is able to stratify everything and put everything in its rightful place, which goes back again to the Socratic wisdom of justice, putting everything in its rightful place.
Yeah, and it is a really important distinction to make, because you do have great thinkers in the recent past who have come, like, for example, Carl Gustav Jung, who talked about the Jesus archetype. But he said that there is not just one, there are many, many, and we have to go on the inner journey. And while some of his kind of logic does make sense, the only thing that is wrong with some of his conclusions is that he believes that anybody can be that in their day and age.
Yes.
Where we say that there is one man in one time who is the chosen veil from behind which God Almighty speaks. And that is, of course, the essence of every single subject that we cover and deliver on this channel. Everything from human rights to news headlines to medicine of the Mehdis to the different kinds of comments that we address. It's all to convey the idea that God speaks from one man in one time, who is the chosen and appointed caliph in the Arabic language, but the vicegerent of God, that intermediary from behind whom God operates. And to recognize him in our day and age is the critical key, isn't it?
It is,
and
Doctor.
Both of us are grew up in the UK. We both come from towns where football is big, granted Division 1 or below. But,
yeah, of course.
But let me set you up. If you had to give a message to the audience, to those people who are tuning in, and of course you're the bishop to Australasia.
Yes, they have the Maori energy and the rugby league and the rugby union, and they're very much into the haka, which goes back to, so even in this concept of sport, which you talk about, whether it's football or rugby, underneath it is this tribal mentality where people want a brotherhood. And I was speaking to one of our brothers in the community recently, and they said everybody's really seeking this fellowship of the soul, this energy where they come together under a banner, and they don't even seem to care what the banner is, but if it represents some kind of holistic energy where they come together and help one another and they support a mission, it gives them a goal setting, it gives them something to work towards, and it's something they can be passionate about and throw their energy into. And it's such a wonderful feeling when you come together and support your brother and you work together, and that's what this energy of the football and the rugby, and it does have that great bonding aspect. But if you don't have the right banner, and this is the point, because it's like the beautiful saying in the book of Isaiah, that he raises a banner for the nations and gathers the scattered of Israel from all corners of the world. So who is that? It's not just a regular banner, it's a special banner. And I think that's very beautiful, because for me as an outsider, I was always looking into these aspects. I was part of a football team and I loved that. But it was empty in the end, it didn't have that energy.
There you go. So this is what we were speaking about yesterday, and I was just trying to make amends for what I said, because I was saying that it is a form of replacing that community spirit that we all seek and yearn for. And loneliness is really a real condition and disease that many people suffer. Most men lead lives of quiet desperation. That dark hour in the night where they're yearning for some sort of connection with another human being who understands them. This is what people really want. And the way society has become compartmentalized and divided is no coincidence, and it's not by accident.
And I think it is a trick of the devil, because he does substitute the banner of truth with a banner so that the revolutions don't keep overflowing. And you satiate and you opiate the people with rules and rituals and religion, and and in general life in society, you give them a banner, a sports team, you give them bread and circuses, and then it keeps them sedated for a while. It keeps them under control because they can unleash
it
all that
partially meets that need.
It partially meets that need for connection, and so they think, well, it's okay. I've got my football team, and they even have mantras they quote on the terraces. I'm something till I die. It's like it's till I die. It's my blood.
This is the new church.
I'll spill my blood for this. It's a new church, and it's the same with, I dare say, the public houses. So if you take away the public houses and the sports venues, I think you would find there'd be quite a few revolutionary characters springing up, even in so-called civilized affluent nations of the West.
Sure. So let's stick to our sports metaphor, and let's deliver that cross. So if somebody's watching right now, and we talked about identifying the Caliph of God, which Christianity believes Jesus will return. In Buddhism, there's the idea of a Maitreya. In Hinduism, there is the return of the Kalki, or the coming of Vishnu in his 10th avatar. In Judaism, there's a belief in a Messiah figure that returns. Of course, they didn't recognize. And we have the Mahdi in Islam. Now, we're saying that Islam is the last rendition of God's hand being extended to humanity in the form of making a covenant. So if you are now saying, well, Prophet Muhammad brought the Islamic religion, the religion of submission to God, and it says the sixth covenant, how do we recognize the successor in this chain of successors that comes from God? Like, what is the criteria? If you had to give somebody a very short synopsis of this very critical point.
Yeah, exactly. You need to establish and recognize that there is an unbroken chain of successors. And a clear indication of that, usually that individual who is sent by God comes forward with a criteria that is very clear, a sunnah, a tradition that is unchanging, which is in essence a letter of appointment or a will. And that happened at the dawn of creation when Adam, peace be upon him, he passed the will to Seth, and in each year they would have a festival to celebrate that will. They would actually take that will out and read the names to remind the people of the significance of that. And the fact that it took place during a festival was because that was a time when the people were happy, and it would be deep in their recognition of the importance of the reality of this will. And it would explain how in the future that Noah would come forth, and Noah would be the riser of the family of Adam and would bring them into that ark of salvation. And we see that that was a continuation, and that was what was amazing me, is when I was delving into these scriptures, as I hadn't realized. I'd read the Torah, I'd read the Gospels in my youth, but I never recognized this clear methodology that Abu Sadiq outlined, that there was a clear criteria that was initially established, I think, by the Yamani, Ahmed Hassan,
of course,
that this law of recognizing the Hujjah was based primarily on this letter of appointment. And we could see that it happened time and time again, and critically with Jesus again, when he read from the scroll of Isaiah to proclaim that he was indeed the one mentioned on the tongue of Isaiah as that messianic figure. And he read that scroll before he did anything else. He didn't perform any miracles before he read from that scroll. So the identification is so critical. And we see today that through the scroll of Muhammad, as you mentioned, Muhammad came forth, peace be upon him, he wrote a scroll. Or he had a will, whatever you want to call it.
He wrote. Yeah, he had Imam Ali dictate. He dictated the will, and Imam Ali alayhi salam, his true successor, was writing down all the names, as you said, of the 12 successors of the Prophet Muhammad, known as the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt, and then after that the 12 Mahdis. The names of the first three explicitly written in the order Abdullah, Ahmed, and Al-Mahdi. This is really crucial to recognize, because if you look at the Abrahamic religions, if you look at Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, all of them really say, well, after this particular individual, there is no more a covenant. So the Jews, of course, recognize Moses as the figurehead, and they say after the Mosaic covenant, that's it. There's nothing else to come after it, and they kind of sever that, what I call the umbilical cord with God.
It is an umbilical cord.
The Christians,
yes,
likewise, they say Jesus is the be-all and end-all. There's nothing coming after him, even though Moses said there would be the savior or the riser from his religion that would come, which is, of course, the Messiah. So Moses, Isaiah, they spoke about the coming of an individual. Then you have, of course, Christianity. And Prophet Jesus saying the Paraclete will come, but the Christians are like, no, it's the end. Nothing comes after Christ.
And Jesus also said there'll be more wise sages and prophets, because many of the Christians who were attacking us after the revolutionary speech by AsyLex were saying that there's no more people after Jesus. Yet in their own books, and not just in the Torah, we're talking about the Gospel of Matthew. It says in, I think, Matthew 23, that there will be wise sages and there will be prophets after me. So then we know that there are also going to be false messiahs. So how do you discern the wolf and the wise shepherd is the key point again.
It's the key point, because then if you fast forward, you come to the Islamic religion, you'll find Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his family also named successors, and he mentioned numerous times, hundreds and hundreds of narrations that talk about the coming of a Mahdi. And this is the bearer of the final and ultimate covenant with mankind, the seventh covenant, which is this particular covenant brought by the riser of the family of Muhammad and the Yamani that you mentioned, James, which is the fulfillment of God's promise with mankind and finally the building of Eden on earth. And this is going to be done through the black stone, through the riser of the family of Muhammad and his companions.
And SubhanAllah always reminded me of that beautiful narration in the Bible when it talks about the cornerstone, the keystone, the capstone that they have rejected is mighty in our eyes, and that is the cornerstone. And even in basic masonry, we know that there is always a stone, actually, if you understand the geometry of building sustainable buildings with proper stone masonry. They have one cornerstone that if you remove, the whole building collapses.
Exactly.
And in essence, the embodiment of that is, of course, the man sent by God today. And that's a beautiful analogy, because we see how they truly have rejected that key capstone. They've completed an aspect of the pyramid, but without that stone, they don't have the spiritual guidance to bring that into the material realm as well. Because if they just have a material perspective, then they are flawed, and that is why in essence we need the Qaim of the family of Muhammad, because he brings, he merges together, which I think is so beautiful, the spiritual wealth of knowledge into the material world, but makes it work. He clicks it together like glue. And I didn't understand that before.
And I think what we'll do is, so that our team behind the scenes is also aware, I want them to line up that clip of Jesus first as being the messenger of the actually talking about a messenger to come after him in reference to the riser of the family of Muhammad and the black stone. So let's just get that set up.
Excellent idea, because it really delves into
we're talking about it right now. Actually,
cornerstone, black stone.
The whole episode yesterday, James, was about the parable of the tenants.
I love the parable of the tenants.
Wicked tenants.
I love the parable of the vineyards as well.
Yes, exactly.
And how the owner sends his son. Or he sends...
well, this is where you were saying, right? The cornerstone that is rejected shall be elevated and taken as the capstone. Or this is what we were reading from the Gospel. It's in all three synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And it's a very significant parable, and it's one used by Imam Ahmad al-Hasan also in his speeches.
In the book, I remember.
To indicate how important this is and what the vineyard represents and who the father is, who the son is, who the servants are that are sent by the father in order to extract their due from the land that the father owns. It brings so many elements into the picture.
Into reality as well, because all of this land is God's land, and he loans it to us, and he gives us the ability to earn money from that land and to prosper from that land. But we have to remember it wasn't ours in the first place. It was a gift, it was a loan. And he sends a man just to say, I want to take back my share of it, or I want to at least you to acknowledge that it's not your land. You know, he's still allowing you to farm it. He's still allowing you to have your area to produce from it, but not to take more than your rightful share and to dominate others. Let everybody have their share. That is all that God is saying. And he's only taking it back from the people that have taken too much. In essence, if you take just what is yours rightfully, then he'll allow everybody to have their share. And I think that's so beautiful. And when we look at the, I dare say, the colonial history, we see a little bit of a legacy of where perhaps they've taken a little bit too much of the cake. And I think that is why a lot of people are getting a bit angsty, because they know that God's policy won't allow for that. And the parable of the tenants is that righteous owner, that righteous servant is basically fundamentally saying, I will not tolerate this any longer. And he has come to apply that law. And as you say, it was alluded to quite a lot by Ahmad Hassan in the opening of the parable of the tenants. And then he said, and now, look what you've done to my servants. Look what you've done to like Zechariah or John the Baptist or Jesus. What have you done to these people? And now I'm sending a servant who I guarantee success, you know? for this, because he's my son, that I will not allow you to flog anymore in the synagogues or to persecute in that level, you know?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's and it's a really great connector, isn't it? Because it also brings Islam into the fold, because the terminology, the cornerstone, is very significant, isn't it, James? Because it talks about, because in Islam, when somebody hears the cornerstone, immediately they think about the black stone in the Kaaba, or the Hajar al-Aswad, which is a critical part of renewing your covenant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so it is this parable that brings all of these elements into one focus. So you've got the non-working scholars, you've got the cornerstone.
Who'll take the non-working scholars, who've usurped the rights of that land, as well as the political tyrants. And you've got the stone, as you say, the Hajar al-Aswad, and people making pilgrimage but not truly understanding the spiritual nature of it. They think it's enough just to touch it or kiss it. But in reality, also the colour as well, isn't it?
Yes.
It was originally white, and it becomes black to represent the sins of the people.
Because it takes away from the people their sin. And this is something that was beautifully spoken about by Abu Sadiq in his speech when he talked about the parable of the tenants with Sister Tiffany, and we had the clips playing on the show yesterday, and it was a fascinating topic. But it is something that connects the legacy of Jesus Christ to the legacy of Prophet Muhammad. And Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his family used to kiss this stone. He used to prostrate on top of this stone. And that stone, Imam Ahmad al-Hassan, peace is from him, the Yamani of the family of Muhammad, revealed in Kitab al-Tawheed, in the book of monotheism, that this is the riser of the family of Muhammad. And he said that it is the Yusuf of the family of Muhammad.
I was just thinking.
And then he took it further. He said, well, in the story of Yusuf, 11 planets and the sun and the moon made prostration, obeisance to him, and they were all pointing to him. He was the person who was promised to come in this day and age as the riser of the family of Muhammad. And in this day and age, the 11 that make prostration are the Imams of the Ahl Bayt, from Al-Hassan all the way down to Muhammad ibn al-Hassan. The Mahdi, the sun, represents Prophet Muhammad, and the moon, the Prince of the Believers. So it's a very beautiful typology.
It is a beautiful typology, and also the concept that I remember when I opened the book recently, the book of monotheism, I think, the book of Tawheed, the true concept of monotheism, the opening part is about Yusuf, or in the Sermon of Hajj. And it literally says we make Yusuf a ruler over the world.
And surely we establish Joseph
in the land,
in the earth. Exactly.
And I think that's so powerful. And then also you see the connection, once again, as you say, to Christianity, to Judaism, to Islam, all of the Abrahamic faiths as one, under this one righteous banner.
It is absolutely fascinating, and if you read the parable of the tenants in the Synoptic Gospels, it is very clearly written that this is the stone that comes to also execute God's judgment, because the whole story goes that basically, I'll put it in a nutshell, that the land is given by God to the people, the scholars of religion who abuse it, who refuse to give God his share, and so God sends servants. The servants are killed, they're beaten, they're humiliated, and then God sends his son. And then, very interestingly, there is an acknowledgement and a recognition by the scholars of religion, by the Pharisees, by the Shia clerics of this time. They recognize them, it says in the Quran, like they recognize their sons. They recognize this individual. They know the will, and yet they reject him. And in rejection, this knowing rejection of the Caliph of God, of the son that has been sent to reclaim what is rightfully God's, and in trying to kill him, there must be judgment, and that judgment is executed in the form of this cornerstone, as Jesus mentions. And that connection there between Jesus and the cornerstone is also very, very significant. If you've read The Goal of the Wise, the book, the Gospel of the Riser of the Family of Muhammad, you will see that Jesus and the riser of the family of Muhammad share a very close link. But
they do.
Let's go to our first clip, and then we'll definitely comment on it, James. I know you have a lot to say on it, because it is a very fascinating topic, and it is worthy of discussion, isn't it?
These stones.
Absolutely. So we'll go to this segment presented by our dear sister Shana, who talks about how the riser of the family of Muhammad is indicated by Jesus Christ, and he is from among those whom he said that he would send to the people. Let's go roll the first clip.
So there are many misconceptions surrounding Abdullah Hashim Abu Sadiq and his teachings. One common misunderstanding is the belief that no messenger can come after Jesus, and therefore Abu Sadiq's claim to be a messenger is automatically dismissed. This idea is based on a misunderstanding of Jesus' teachings. In Matthew, it cautions, "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves." Why would Jesus warn of false prophets if no true prophets were to come after him? If there were to be no future messengers, why would he make such a statement? And why would he not clearly state, "There will be no prophets after me"? The Epistle of John also confirms that prophets will continue to appear. Believe not every spirit, but try the spirits whether they are of God, because many false prophets are gone out into the world. Clearly, the Bible acknowledges the continued presence of prophets after Jesus. In fact, Jesus himself prophesied that messengers would come after him. "Therefore I am sending you prophets and sages and teachers. Some of them you will kill and crucify, others you will flog in your synagogues and pursue from town to town." This verse alone proves that messengers, apostles, and teachers are to come after Jesus. Additionally, the word apostle, from the Greek apostolos, meaning messenger, is used throughout the New Testament to describe the disciples of Jesus. Clearly, the apostles themselves were messengers, and Jesus never invalidated the possibility of new messengers coming after his time. Now, if you deny all that and categorically deny that there were messengers after Jesus, then you also have to deny Paul. Paul never met Jesus. In fact, he was once a fierce opponent of Jesus and his disciples, only converting after Jesus' crucifixion. Despite this, Paul went on to write nearly half of the New Testament and introduced new teachings that most Christians now follow. So if you reject the idea of messengers and new laws after Jesus, then you also have to reject Paul and everything he wrote in the Bible. Let's take a closer look at some of the things Paul changed. Jesus in Matthew clearly said that the law would remain in effect. "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven." Yet, Paul contradicts this in Romans, where he says, "For Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes." In this case, Paul nullifies the very law Jesus confirmed. Further, Jesus was adamant that preaching and teaching should be done free of charge, as we see in Matthew. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, drive out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. However, Paul in Corinthians commands, "Don't you know that those who serve at the temple get their food from the temple, and those who serve at the altar share in what is offered on the altar? In the same way, the Lord has commanded that those who preach the gospel should receive their living from the gospel." So, who will Christians listen to? Will they listen to what Paul preaches or what Jesus preached? Shockingly, most Christians cite Paul more often than Jesus. Paul even advocates submission to earthly rulers, even though Jesus was crucified by them. Paul writes in Romans, "Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established." The authorities that exist have been established by God. Jesus was executed by the very rulers Paul tells people to obey. So by Paul's logic, one would have to accept the very authorities who were responsible for killing Jesus. If you reject the idea of messengers after Jesus, then logically you would have to reject Paul's teachings entirely, which, as history shows, will be quite difficult for most Christians, given his influence on the New Testament. The Christian argument lacks coherence. Finally, let us look at another very important verse in the Bible. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. This is crucial because it indicates that his role as the guiding light was specific to the time when he was physically present, while Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through him. He emphasized that his presence as the light of the world was limited to his time on earth. When Jesus ascended, he entrusted his disciples with the Holy Spirit and promised that God would continue to guide them, and he did so by leaving them with an unbroken line of successorship.
Yeah, that's a really powerful segment, and really, to be honest with you, as a young man, instinctively, when I was brought up in a Catholic school, I was certainly intimidated by those teaching me, but I was very aware that the teachings of Jesus were ringing true, the way that he was speaking on the tongue, in reference to being the light of this world, as our dear sister Shana just said. And that there obviously was a continuation, but Paul always seemed to disturb me with his character and his seemingly hijacking of the religion. And hence when he says something like we're saved by the grace, and yet 45,000 sects have been created from Christianity since the time of Jesus' straight path and his clear way. And all of those so-called pathways claim to have the discernment of the Holy Spirit, yet they all come up with a completely different analysis of how the religion should be. And, you know, whether you take a Jehovah that will see Jesus perhaps as a prophet messenger, others will proclaim him as the absolute God, yet they've all got the spirit of discernment. This is a very disturbing concept for me, and a very disturbing thought pattern that we could reflect on. And this whole concept that Jesus came to fulfill the law. You know, he didn't come to say that there is no law, and Paul was basically saying, you know, just believe in Jesus, everything's fine, you're saved by the grace, he died for your sins, and you don't have to do anything. So life is no longer a testing place. You know, this material plane is no longer a place where we have to learn and we have to develop and we have to challenge ourselves. It's just to say that we believe in Jesus, everything is all right, and the whole world can go to hell, but it doesn't matter. And this is a very devilish philosophy, I think. And everything that Paul was doing was simply antichrist and one of the worst things was to say to obey those in authority over you, even if they're tyrant oppressors, in essence. I thought this was very disturbing, because then it would ultimately mean that the ones that crucified Jesus were okay in the eyes of Paul. So he was obviously an asset, it seems, for the state of Rome.
Exactly, yes. This is a very controversial individual, never met Jesus a day in his life, and yet claimed to be his successor. It's a very weird story. It doesn't add up. And actually, the story is kind of referenced in Surah Yasin, as recently revealed by AsyLex, which is one of the surahs in the Quran, in which there is a story of a village in which God sends two messengers, and then the people reject them, it says. So God sends a third one to support them. This third messenger that was sent, according to the narrations of the Ahl Bayt and by the revelation of the rise of the family of Muhammad al-Sadiq, he said that this was Simon Peter to support two other disciples, and the name of the town that they were in was Antioch, which is where Paul was opposing the disciples of Jesus.
This was a concept of the circumcision, wasn't it, which is interesting?
Yes, over the topic of circumcision and Paul's changing of the law of Christ and giving his own version of events. And he said, basically, you 11 disciples that are left, you betrayed Jesus, and you are now only for the Israelites. I have been appointed by Jesus for the rest of the world.
Incredible.
For the non-Israelites.
Incredible.
Exactly.
So not only is he changing the law and denying the law of Moses that Jesus came to fulfill,
yes,
he's also now saying that those disciples, they can be sidelined, they can be pushed into the corner, and they're actually their leader, who was appointed by Jesus, as it said, that he gave him the keys to the kingdom.
Yes.
He is now a hypocrite.
Yeah.
Of his own religion, meaning that if he is sent by Jesus, now Jesus in the eyes of Paul becomes a hypocrite. So now God in the eyes of Paul, and I don't want to say it, but I have to.
Yeah, well, I mean,
it's the truth.
I find it staggering that Christians take Paul with more respect and reverence in Simon Peter. I mean, here's an individual who, according to the Gospels, is Jesus says he is the church, he is the rock upon which I will build my church. I mean, these are heavy words indeed for those who contemplate, and they are giving more importance to a person who never met Jesus except in a vision that he had when he was going to kill the followers of Jesus. It's a very strange, paradoxical, nonsensical kind of way to look at things, but this is really what's happening. People give more relevance to Paul than they do to Simon Peter. There is a book that's attributed to Simon Peter. Now, whether or not it is completely and totally unadulterated book, but Paul wrote half of the New Testament.
I mean, that is a complete abomination, how that was allowed to happen, which proves that the canonical Gospels were created with a political and an agenda, a clear agenda for empire building. And that's what the Roman Empire was doing. And many of the books that are attributed to Paul or Luke were written much later than the original Gospels that were not accepted and were called apocryphal, when in essence many of them had a lot of truth in them. And we can go back to the concept of the Nag Hammadi text, and if you go into the Nag Hammadi text and you read the Gospel of Truth, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, you find some startling revelations that tie in with the teachings of Jesus when he talked about how important it was for man and woman to come together and marry. And yet the idea is that surely the man who exemplifies that would be the one who says it would do it himself. You know, why would you say something that's critical for the sake of mankind but not practice it yourself? Because the messenger and the prophet is normally the one that practices it in order to show that how it works to the people. He becomes that acolyte, you know?
Yes, indeed. And where is the city of Antioch?
It's in Turkey, isn't it?
It's in Turkey.
I've been there. It's an interesting place.
It's a very interesting place.
Near Antalya.
Yes, lots of interesting things happened, and of course this was the place where Paul was from.
Yeah, I remember
Paul
when I was
Tarsus.
there, they had a church for Simon Peter that I went to visit, and they had a tomb, I think, of Habibi Nekkar or something, and they said he was connected to that free.
Habib al-Najjar, yes. So yeah, there is lots of interesting things that we can contemplate on. Turkey, of course, also was mentioned by Imam Ahmad al-Hassan as a country that will play a key part in the unfolding of events before the rise of the Qa'im. So it is a country to keep an eye on, and there are many secrets in that land. There are many people who believe that the Ark of Noah on Mount Ararat, which was in Turkey, there are many things that are of relevance there, but there are also relevant things in this day and age with the believers. We had the Edirne detention camp where members of our religion were put, the 104,
that was a very critical story. That was very disturbing. Members of our faith who were literally making a freedom march. And they'd had a letter signed by over 20 different NGOs and human rights agencies who all said that they were waiting and happily waiting on the other side of the border to greet them and grant them support in order to gain their rights for freedom. People that had been oppressed, people that had been attacked in their own homes in Iraq and Iran, people that had been forced to take certain drugs because their family members decreed them to be insane because they believed in the Qa'im of the family of Muhammad. They were making that freedom march, and with women and children, elderly and families, and with all their clothes and cases to show that this was a serious thing, that this was people doing it genuinely, you know, with their homes on their back in essence. And what happened? Despite all of this and giving due warning to the governments and the institutions, they didn't try and climb over a fence. They didn't try and go through some entourage. They did it by the law, by the book, and they were there, standing there very smartly and civilized and very moral and mannered. And despite even letting them into that enclave, they beat them back. And they pushed back against them and forced them into detention and interrogated them. And some of the horror stories of how the children were dealt with and forced to sit in the sunlight for long hours without water, diabetics, and many people had very severe treatment, and their chronic conditions, as you know as a doctor, became a lot more exacerbated, and many of them suffered immensely, and still today they must be suffering from the after effects. And they were then going to practice this law of non-refoulement, I think they call it, where it says under the UN Charter you should not send people back to a nation where they will most likely face detention and potential execution in the likes of Iran. And yet they
No
were pushing
exaggeration to
hard as
say
a
that.
nation to do that, weren't they, Turkey?
Absolutely, they were, and we had first-hand accounts from people who were there specifically sent for the purpose of getting this information to the World Wide Web and just spreading that information. We had Brother Sermet and Alexandra who were there on the ground. It's interesting, isn't it? To the land of Antioch, 2 messengers were sent, like Surah Yasin, and they managed to deliver some absolutely horrific reports, which then were later handed over to the various NGOs who support our cause. The UN was very prominently featured in this, of course, James.
The UN was very prominent. You also have to reflect, for the sake of just regular people, because we have a movement, we have a big religious movement, we have our own status as a US 501c, and we have a good collaboration with the UN and many human rights agencies. You imagine 2 or 3 individuals that go to the border, what treatments are they going to face? What protections are they going to face? So these horror stories are obviously taking place on a massive scale on these borders, and this is a European border. This is not a border in some third world nation. This is supposed to be a place where people receive some civilized support and care. It's horrendous, and no wonder people are taking boats and trying to go over borders through boats and very dangerous settings, because they feel that they may face these kind of scenarios.
Yes, and now we've spoken about the UN and we've spoken about Turkey, and we have more news, James, believe it or not, coming in from the land of Turkey, where the disciples and apostles of Jesus were sent to deliver the message, and they were opposed by the Antichrist Paul, and Simon Peter was sent as a third to reinforce them. In that land, there was rejection at that time. There was rejection in this time in the form of Edirne, the detention camp.
Detention and the Godames or whatever.
And now it's back in the news in the Divine Just State magazine. There was an article that was published that is talking about new developments in Turkey. So let's bring up the first slide on the screen and we can read through that, hopefully, and expand further.
Yeah, let's have a look. So we have the UN ordering Turkey to halt the deportation of AROPL members. The UN Human Rights Committee has issued a decision ordering Turkey to halt the deportation of 2 Iranian members of the Ahmadi Religion of Peace and Light until... maybe you can continue from here.
Okay, yeah, let's start. So the United Nations Human Rights Committee has issued a decision ordering Turkey to halt the deportation of 2 Iranian members of the Ahmadi Religion of Peace and Light amid mounting concerns for the group's safety and reports of severe religious persecution in their home country. The committee's intervention comes after the 2 men, Ali Lakzayan Taimur and Jafari Sajjad, were detained by Turkish authorities and faced imminent deportation for distributing religious leaflets. The pair, who had fled Iran to escape state-led persecution, were arrested and issued deportation orders despite no criminal charges having been brought against them for their peaceful religious activities. In its decision, the UN Human Rights Committee cited Turkey's obligations under international law, emphasizing that the state must not deport Taimur and Sajjad to Iran while their cases are under review. A third Iranian believer, Mansour Degan, is also being held with the 2 men. His deportation case is currently under review by Turkey's constitutional court. Again, exactly what you said.
At this point, what is disturbing me the most is that it's a repeat of what we just said, and this happened in Turkey, 2023, was it? Or?
Yes, absolutely.
I know but we just wanted to reflect on that because it's such a critical point. The history is repeating itself.
I mean, the UN is saying, look, if you send these 3 Iranian members of the Ahmadi Religion of Peace and Light back home, they will most likely be executed. Their lives, they're going to be tortured.
And this is a critical law called the non-refoulement law. So it's not just some made-up thing. This is something that's institutionalized. This is a legal terminology that they cannot not know about. You know, the diplomats of Turkey, they know about this. This is a precedent that is even in our own faith 2 years ago.
And it's also, when you look at it from a legal aspect, you also have to give some blame. If anything goes wrong, then the party that sent back these people to their homeland is a party to it, without a shadow of a doubt.
In any resulting
absolutely complicit.
Outcome.
And therefore, I mean, you can see why the UN stood up and raised their voice in this situation, because it's clear what the outcome would be if these 3 Iranian believers were sent back to Iran. It would be a horrendous, disgraceful move.
What kind of despotic government is Turkey representing here, you know, and in the apparatus and the individuals that operate in that at a higher level? It's beyond comprehension. It really is. It really is. And that is why it's so beautiful that we have this movement in our religion where we stand up against tyranny.
Yeah, and this is all spiritual reinforcement by Abu Sadiq. That infuses the hearts with passion, don't they?
Exactly. He infuses the hearts of the people to stand up against tyranny, and they go out there in public to do that. And subhanAllah, by doing that, they are supported by this apparatus, and it reaches up to the level of the UN, because God is with his people. And he does not allow them, their fruits of their labor not to be rewarded.
Yeah, and Abu Sadiq is certainly not going to shrink away from a confrontation when a confrontation is required. He will stand firm, he will plant his feet firmly in the ground, and he will do everything in his power before he can say, now it is in the hands of God. He will ensure this. He has this beautiful trait where he will not back down.
And it's not just for the sake of AROPL and the AROPL members and the believers, because it sets a precedent and it sets a tone and a landmark for future generations, you know, and it means for the next people that go into a situation like that, they now have got this landmark case where we have been successful to support them in their problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are very fortunate to be here as the disciples of the riser of the family of Muhammad and to learn from his example. And if we were ever to be in a similar situation, we would take a leaf out of his handbook of how never to give up on your people, how to give everything that you have, make sure that you knock on every single door, and whether or not that door opens is in God's hand. But we have confidence in God that if we do everything in our power, he will do everything to support us. And God has granted Abu Sadiq tremendous success in this regard through a team of believers who have absolute faith in him, led by, of course, Sister Hadil Al-Khuli, that we haven't had for a very long time. I want to get her back on the couch and speak to her soon, inshallah, but she's been very busy.
She's worth 1,000 men or many more, you know, because she works tirelessly, and she knows everything about the laws, in essence, to work by the law properly. And she works, you know, fearlessly to do this. And you also have to reflect, don't you, that these people in that 104 situation, if it hadn't been for the likes of Abu Sadiq's mission and for the likes of Surmad and Alex there as well, as
to highlight the injustices and crimes against humanity,
you know, I think it would have been a very different outcome. And that's why it's a work of genius. And this mission is a work of genius, and God's mission is a work of genius.
Let's bring up the next slide and see what it says, and then reflect on it as well. So this is the second one. This is all in the Divine Just State magazine that you are always prominently featured in, James.
Sometimes.
The UN decision follows a broader pattern of concern over the treatment of the Ahmadi Religion of Peace and Light members in Turkey. In May of 2023, more than 100 members of the group, including women and children, were detained at the Turkish-Bulgarian border while seeking asylum in Bulgaria. Turkish police used excessive force to prevent the group from crossing, resulting in injuries of at least 30 people. Detainees were subjected to beatings, sexual harassment, and sleep deprivation while in custody. The Turkish Ministry of Internal Affairs subsequently issued deportation orders for 101 members of the group. The UN has warned that returning these individuals to their countries of origin could expose them to serious human rights violations, including imprisonment, torture, and even execution, particularly in countries such as the Islamic Republic of Iran.
And it really is, again, that reflection on Sodom and Gomorrah politics.
Yes.
You know, when we go back to Sodom and Gomorrah, it really is like that, you know, where they have one rule for them and one rule for everyone else.
Yes.
And they live in luxury and they live in excess. And they treat foreigners, and it says in Exodus, doesn't it? Treat the foreigners as you were foreigners once.
Yes.
Treat them with respect and love.
Look, I purposefully use the Islamic Republic of Iran as a tongue-in-cheek comment, because they profess to have the morals and manners of the Prophet Muhammad, but actually they're closer to, as James said, Sodom and Gomorrah. Why do we say that? Because here is a revelation for the people that the riser of the family of Muhammad made. Sodom and Gomorrah were obliterated from the highest to the lowest by God through his angels and through his punishment and judgment, not because of the practice of homosexuality. Newsflash. It was because of their treatment of God's representative, the messenger sent by God to that nation, which was Prophet Lot, or Lut alayhi salam, and in rejecting him, in trying to kill him, in trying to dishonor him, they were destroyed for that reason. And in that regard, Iran is indeed the Sodom and Gomorrah of this day and age, for sure, if not worse, because the proofs have been presented in this day and age through the multimedia and social media platforms that we have in a way that has never been done before, with such clarity that no one, any single scholar from that country, is prepared to come forward and debate us publicly. And when they do, they get absolutely humiliated, as we all witnessed at the hands of our brother Hamid Reza, who absolutely pulverized the scholar, and he had nothing to say whatsoever meaningful when it comes to the debate on theological differences. He was making personal attacks, lies and smears, but nothing to the point where he could argue on any point that was raised by Hamid Reza.
And then they flatly said themselves that if the Mahdi comes and we already have our own state, and he challenges that state, we don't want him. And in fact, we'll fight him. And we'll do whatever's necessary to eliminate him if he challenges our status quo, our authority, our elitism, ultimately. And that really ties in with that beautiful narration again, whereas you kind of alluded to it, go back, O son of Fatima, we have no need of you. So they recognize him, they know there's a will, they know there's a succession, they know that the man is supposed to come in this apocalyptic end time scenario, because they're very aware of it from the hadiths. Did they not read them? Did they not have the most scholarly places in Najaf, in all of these places? I know that's in Iraq, but they have
it's pretty much the same thing. It's the same apparatus.
Or Shiraz or Tehran. They have so many scholars, and yet despite all of that learning, when the man comes, go back, O son of Fatima.
Yeah, and this is why the judgment comes to pass, because there is a clear recognition, as we said in the parable of the tenants. They recognize the Caliph of God and they reject him in spite of that knowledge. As you articulated, James, there, go back, O son of Fatima, is a clear recognition of God's Caliph, and then rejecting him brings upon the scholars of the end times the worst creatures under the sky, by the words of the Prophet Muhammad, who are now chief in misleading people off the straight path and leading them into the fire of hell.
Back of your parable of tenants again. They are those ones in the parable of the tenants who have stolen the land.
Absolutely. I think there's one more slide from our Turkish news about the deportation of the Iranian individuals, I believe. There we go. So, again, the UN orders Turkey to halt deportation of AROPL members. They just will not listen, will they, James? And let's read this last slide. AROPL members face severe persecution in several Muslim-majority countries. They are often labeled as heretics and infidels, facing threats, violence, and arbitrary detention. Many have fled to Turkey from countries such as Algeria, Morocco, Egypt, Iran, Iraq, and Malaysia to escape religious persecution and blasphemy laws that criminalize their beliefs. The UN has reiterated its call for Turkey to conduct fair and independent assessments of each asylum seeker's protection needs and to refrain from deporting individuals who may face grave danger in their countries of origin. The Ahmadi Religion of Peace and Light welcomes the decision of the UN Human Rights Committee and expresses its gratitude to the Rule 39 Pro Bono Initiative and AsyLex for their dedicated efforts in achieving this outcome. AROPL calls for continued vigilance to protect the rights of its members and other vulnerable asylum seekers in Turkey.
So that's beautiful as well, because we see it's not just about AROPL, it is also about other people that are suffering from these same circumstances at the hands of these Sodom and Gomorrah type characters. And we see how truly the world is divided through these borders. You know, you go from east to west, we have so many borders, so many different areas, and these are almost no man's land zones, you know, and no one seems to know whose right it is, whose land it is. And, you know, God's people, the land, as we say in the parable of the tenants, God's land is rich for everybody. And God never put borders in place. He wanted people to be free in this world, you know. And if I want to visit my brother in North Korea and I'm living in South Korea, why shouldn't I be allowed to go and visit my brother in North Korea and share in his vineyard when he comes and shares in my vineyard? You know, who are we to put borders up and barriers to that, you know, in the name of what?
Arbitrary detention, arbitrary borders. It's the same news around the world. And one of the common themes, like the parable of the tenants that was used earlier on in the show, is the hospitality and compassion for the refugee, which the scriptures mention over and over again. And what they're doing in Turkey completely contradicts anything to do with Islam or any of the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. In fact, the Prophet Muhammad's community, peace be upon him and his family, in the very beginning stages was a refugee community going and fleeing to countries like Abyssinia. But unlike in Turkey, they were not deporting them back in spite of being a different religion and in spite of the propaganda that was created by the Quraysh elites against the fledgling Muslim community. The king of that country...
Negus was amazing. I mean, he welcomed them, didn't he? When they sent an emissary from Prophet Muhammad under Jaffa.
Yes.
I think he was he the cousin of the Prophet, peace be upon him?
Yes, absolutely.
He went there and he sent an emissary there because obviously I think Prophet Muhammad was welcoming many different empires, wasn't he? The Abyssinian Empire, the Byzantium.
He had written to all of the heads of state.
Exactly. Khosrow, I think, in Persia. And he sent literally a delegation, you might say, to Abyssinia. And they met with a great a man, King Negus. I think he was a Christian man, and they exclaimed the teachings of Jesus. And he said he listened with intellect. He listened without judgment, and he could affirm that they were actually linking again, as we say, this connection between Jesus and Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And he could recognize that the spirit that they were exclaiming about Jesus was the same spirit that they recognized from their own teachings and their own gospels. And so they embraced the faith. That was a beautiful thing. And they treated them like they were their brothers. And even if they hadn't embraced the faith, because they were godly people, they embraced them, like Imam Ali would say, as brothers in humanity. And we know the enemy of God is always close behind, like a shadow. And they sent their delegation as well, didn't they?
They headed by Amr ibn al-As, the infamous Amr ibn al-As.
My old friend,
who cursed Aristotle, of course, as you know, the very famous person. He killed many.
Oh, he went over there.
He was sent.
He was the one that was very keenly following to try and derail that movement and to try and mock Jaffa and make the king, because he knew that the Quraysh were being threatened by the establishment of Prophet Muhammad's mission, peace be upon him.
He was handpicked for the job. He was a silver-tongued devil, and he was persuasive in the way he presented the case. But the king of Negus, you see, he's, like you said, James, he was a man that had been given wisdom by God. Discernment, and he was able to make the right call. And he said to Amr ibn al-As that not for 1,000 pieces of silver and gold will I hand them over to you. He had their chains and shackles removed. And he turned his kingdom into a refugee land for this fledgling Muslim community of believers who had fled their homeland seeking safety in a foreign country.
And Jesus did the same thing, peace be upon him, even after he supposedly died in the spirit, but he only died in the flesh, as we know. He sent delegations through the apostles, and they traveled the world, didn't they? Mark and all of the apostles, they went to the far reaches.
They didn't have very good outcomes.
Not necessarily.
They weren't given refuge, but they I think
the message.
They have to spread, and you have to. There's a verse in the Quran that says that people will say to God, we were persecuted in the land. God says, why didn't you migrate? Was not my earth wide enough for you to immigrate?
Exactly. And they often say, don't they, no prophet is accepted in his hometown. So in essence, that would imply, if you are a messenger, if you seek to be a messenger of God, and you're in your hometown, well, obviously you need to go somewhere else, because people judge you often, I think is the case, based on your previous history before you were declared a messenger. Oh, but he was a carpenter, he was a cobbler, he was a filmmaker. Well, he can't be a messenger of God now.
No.
So therefore they've got that old rhetoric, that old stigmatization of who you are, stereotype.
Yeah, it's an interesting contrast, isn't it, James? Because we talked about the hospitality, the kindness of the king of Abyssinia, and then we contrasted it with the rejection of Christ's disciples in Antioch, Turkey. And history seems to be repeating itself, isn't it? That there are certain countries that have given refuge to these beleaguered people who have been abused and cursed and ostracized from society, and they've allowed them to live in their countries,
Yes,
countries such as Spain,
Latvia,
and
I think. And we must give plaudits to these
France,
countries for
yeah,
that
absolutely.
activity. And
Absolutely.
that's very beautiful.
Credit where credit's due.
Exactly.
And other countries like Turkey, who profess to be Islamic in their
That's incredible.
belief system, have been anything, they've been like the Qurayshis.
But that makes me reflect, just on a little bit of a fun tangent, but a side point. You know, we have believers that raise a banner in Belgium, which is a non-Muslim country, to say allegiances to God. Carry on, you're fine as you are. We have believers doing the same thing in Morocco, where they proclaim to be the followers of the family of Muhammad. They claim to be having the prince of the believers. But you raise that banner and you're being house arrested.
House arrested you. Disappearance. What's it called? Forced disappearance, arbitrary detention. These types of terms, very, very commonplace now in North Africa, unfortunately. But so that was an important piece, wasn't it? That we're talking about this. It's really, really crucial, and there is Abu Sadiq has, like we said, he has put aside somebody who oversees the plight of these people and helps them through these NGOs like Amnesty, like the UN, who come forward and offer and lend their support, and Human Rights Watch and all these other organizations. And I really like the way that in that particular article in Divine Just State magazine, they were acknowledged for their humanitarianism. They were acknowledged for their kindness in giving refuge to the refugee, which is of course one of the UN charters that is guaranteeing safety and sanctuary to those people who are facing extreme persecution and death in their homeland. Yeah,
which is absolutely an abomination that could be happening in this day and age. An absolute abomination that in a country like Iran, in Morocco or in Malaysia, where people say that they uphold the faith in God, where they say that they believe in the allegiance to God and that supremacy is to God alone, that they are persecuting people that are literally going out there displaying banners to say allegiance is to God alone. And we believe that we know, everybody knows what in the end times apocalyptic age, and the awaited Mehdi that they claim to be wanting has actually come, and that they are persecuting these people. They are literally flogging them in the synagogues as they would at the time of Jesus, and they are suffering immensely, you know?
They are suffering immensely, but we are principled people. We hold to the truths that Abu Sadiq teaches. We are the religion of peace and light, and there's a segment coming up now where Brother Zhuang beautifully kind of elucidates who we are and where we get our values from. We get them from the Caliph of God in every day and age. And let's go to the next segment with Brother Zhuang, who explains what it is to be a believer in this call.
What is religion really? At its root, it's not cathedrals or rituals. It's a story, a man, a message, a mission. Every major religion started that way, small, misunderstood, often rejected. Jesus and his disciples, labeled blasphemers. The early Muslims, driven out, persecuted. They weren't seen as holy, they were seen as dangerous rebels. So when people call us a cult, I have to ask, why? Is it because we're new? So were they. Is it because we follow a man appointed by God? But so did every faith that came before us. I am part of the Ahmadi religion of peace and light. We started as a handful and then grew. From Egypt to Germany to Sweden and now here in the UK. We became a family, a reflection of Abdullah Hashim Abu Sadiq and the values he lives by. Openness, justice, truth. We're free to stay, we're free to leave. We're not isolated, we're engineers, doctors, artists, students. We didn't lose control of our lives. The lives of slaves lost us. People throw around the word cult to dismiss or discredit, but we ask questions, we read everything. There's no banned book in our community, no forbidden idea. Abu Sadiq didn't proclaim himself, he was appointed, named, just as Joshua was named by Moses. Jesus foretold the Paraclete, and the Prophet Muhammad named successors from his family. That's the tradition we follow. That's what we believe, that God still speaks, that guidance didn't end centuries ago. We believe in Eden, in justice, in building a community where no one is above the truth and no one is below dignity. So what does that make us? Are we called a cult simply because we're not mainstream? Because we don't fit into old molds? Because we challenge comfortable assumptions about faith and authority? Or are we, like the early Christians and early Muslims, the beginning of something sacred? If you really want to know who we are, come, see for yourself, ask your questions, speak to Abba Sadiq directly. We're not afraid of scrutiny, because truth, real truth, only grows stronger when exposed.
Yeah, I think Brother Zhuang raised some very important questions. Why is any person or any movement that opposes the mainstream agenda, why are they called a cult?
You go against the stream, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And like I shared with you that quote, you know, like the fish that goes against the current.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
A very interesting quote. Of course, we also believe in the Taoist philosophy of flow, but there is another aspect to it, that if you are a fish that just goes with the current, that's a dead fish. It's a fish that is alive that goes against the mainstream.
Yeah, look at the salmon, and I think you've alluded to this in the past, that salmon that goes back when it's fully grown to lay the seed, it has to go racing
against
up,
the current.
Against the current. And look at the risks that it implicates by doing that. But it's willing to do that because it knows it's the truth, it knows it's its mission, and it goes up against this river, and as it leaps out of the water, and it's got this power and this endurance to do it, this willpower, it risks being eaten by the grizzly bear, or being banished against the rocks.
It's a perilous journey.
It's a perilous journey, but the result and the victory is to blossom that seed and to grow the divine just state even more, you know, and it really is that analogy there. And what Zhuang is alluding to is that in essence, but we are prepared to do that because we know that the fruits are ripe. You know, and they're good fruits that we're reaping by following the man sent by God, even if it is against the mainstream. And we're not looking to go against any stream, but we're just looking for the truth and following where the truth lies. And if that dialer to God is through that individual, then that is where the truth lies. And establishing the divine just state is really that aspect of humanity. And if people want to brandish that, a cult, well, then they should, as you say, and as Zhuang says, look at the nature of the early days of the movement of Jesus Christ and Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when they had a disparate.
They were trailblazers.
They were trailblazers, and they had a few zealots, they had a few fishermen, and a few former tax collectors, and they came together. And they decided that this man was truly sent by God. And you know, there were probably a few that said, you know what, I'm not really understanding it, but he seems to be a good man who puts humanity first, and I want to be with this individual, and I want to be part of this movement. This is a fellowship that makes sense to me. And that's what they did. And they grew in numbers because they were willing to then proselytize that mission. And they went out there 2 by 2 in order to do that. And we know from the book of Acts that they literally gave everything they had for that mission because they believed it was
in it. They bought into it 100%.
They believed it was divine, and it had a goal, a true goal, a true mission.
Yes, and unfortunately they fell short of the mark, but they gave it their all in their time. But this is the time of the cornerstone.
Exactly, and in essence we say cult, but culture. It grows from a cult to a culture. But
right, this is what every new religious movement is called at some stage. Look, if there's that coming back to that Le Chatelier's principle in chemistry, if to a system a change is imposed, a system reacts to oppose that change. And this is something that every single prophet and messenger had to deal with. And when you talk about in modern times, history is replete with examples of individuals who stood up against the mainstream narrative and spoke out. Initially, at the time, they were ridiculed. They were attacked, they were mocked, they were cursed, they were killed.
Socrates,
but now they're venerated.
Socrates,
even in recent times, like you look at Martin Luther King, you look at Malcolm X, these types of individuals Mahatma who came up and stood up
in India.
Yeah, they were all martyred. They were all killed.
Martyrs, you know, who stood up for justice, and whatever stance they took, whether it was a silent revolution, whether it was literally just sitting there and saying to the people, this is intolerable. We will not accept this colonial domination over our people anymore, and I will fast, and I will make some standpoint, you know, to show that my flesh is not important anymore. Yeah. You know, it's a bit like the concept of what Gandhi was willing to do when he went on those freedom marches. And he was an educated man who understood the reality of what he was doing. He understood that in essence the flesh is weak, but the soul is powerful and willing. And Socrates was another great example for me in my life. Yes. And how Socrates...
The gadfly of Athens.
Yeah, how he was willing to take that hemlock cup. He didn't just take it willingly, he took it joyfully. You know, it was like honey for Socrates,
Yeah.
because he knew what he was doing was laying a landmark.
Yeah.
And then anyone that then therefore read the works of Socrates afterwards through his voice piece, which was Plato, i.e. the Divine Republic, would realize that it wasn't just made as a fantasy story, that this was a marker for a state to come in the future.
Yeah.
And that's
Plato,
very
who
beautiful.
dictated the will of Socrates, huh?
Yeah.
Yes, and this was something that takes a great deal of faith and courage, because you really risk your life. You put your life on the line, and you imagine walking in the shoes of these people, going into the cities and into the towns and into the villages and saying to them, look, I have been appointed by God, I have been sent with a message, you have to obey me. And obedience is a crucial aspect of that relationship with God, because in the beginning we don't know what we're doing. We need a spiritual guide, just as if you were going to learn a martial art. You start from the beginning and you work your way under the stewardship of a teacher, of a master, of a sensei, until you finally acquire that black belt, and then you can go and teach the people for yourself. The disciples of Christ very much went through this process, where initially they were newborn cubs, and they had to be trained and disciplined by Jesus Christ until one day he then gave them the green light to go and proselytize and spread the word and spread his gospel to the nation of Israel. So this is where we're at. We're at that stage where obedience is really of foremost importance. Obedience to the Caliph of God is obedience to God himself, and it is that training of body, mind and spirit to be able to endure this perilous journey that goes upstream against the current. It is to prepare us, to make us resilient, and that is the job of the Caliph of God, because the Qa'im, the riser of the family of Muhammad, has 313 companions in his inner circle, and then 10,000 in the circle that exists outside of this. And all of them have the responsibility to share that divine knowledge that they've been entrusted with for the benefit of humanity. But it all begins with obedience. And now let's go to our next segment, which emphasizes the importance of this critical aspect of religion, where we must recognize that we are in need of God initially. We need his training, and to train under God requires obedience and submission.
Yes.
Let's roll the clip.
Obedience to the man appointed by God means recognizing someone chosen by God, not just someone who claims it, but truly appointed, just like the prophets before him. It's trusting that his guidance comes directly from God.
Obedience isn't just about blind submission. It's about making that conscious choice to align your lives with a divine plan. Think of a symphony, where the man of God is the only one who knows how to play the right instrument at the right time to create the perfect harmony.
Obedience matters, because building the divine just state without guidance is like trying to put together a machine without instructions. It won't work right. It will lead to confusion and mistakes. Following the right guidance will help everything run smoothly and stay organized.
Today, AsyLex is the visionary architect guiding this great project. He understands exactly how every part connects and supports the whole, ensuring a solid foundation and a design that truly works. Without his careful oversight and wisdom, the divine just state couldn't come to life or last.
By obeying and supporting AsyLex, we hope to bring this divine mission to life, just as the early followers has shared in all that they had in unity and faith.
Obedience to the appointed messenger is not about losing our freedom. It's about choosing to trust a divine wisdom greater than our own. It's a spiritual partnership, a commitment to live by guidance that brings peace, justice and harmony.
The obedience we practice shows the unity and purpose needed to build a divine just state. A society based on love, justice and equality for all. It's a collective effort with each of us playing our part under the leadership appointed by God.
Well, James, you featured in that clip there. You were very eloquent as ever, quoting the importance of obedience in the spiritual journey.
It's so important, and once again we have to reiterate that the man sent by God is not just a spiritual Sunday school teacher, as it alludes to in the Goal of the Wise, and they'd love to relegate the messenger of God to a spiritual Sunday school teacher where you can go and recite tasbih and then the book is sufficient for us. Just sit there reading, and we'll manage the state affairs for you. We'll manage the society and the economics and the politics.
Yeah, mismanage.
You just sit. Yeah, we'll mismanage, exactly. And you just go and sit there in the synagogue and talk to the people. But critically, obedience is
about the
required.
importance of respecting your parents and things like this.
Yeah, exactly.
This doesn't bother Satan.
Exactly. It's an abomination, because the spiritual guide...
Not respecting your parents, but just the idea that we take our spirituality from a teacher at the church or the mosque once a week, and then the rest of the day, everything else that we do is decided by the unjust, evil tenants,
and then you are truly relegating the role of the messenger into such a low rank. And it's a great deception that the devil's played.
Yeah, that quote was from the Goal of the Wise, right? The Sunday school teacher.
It was, and we talked about it ourselves.
Yeah, it is fascinating.
And it is so true, and it's really, that's how people treat their religion. And even in Islam today, the majority of people, they'll go to the Friday prayers, they'll dress up, and then go back to their regular lives. I've had my fill of my scholar for the week. He told me to divide and conquer. He told me to obey my leader. Let's just get on with that, and I'll suffer in silence. Because I'm suffering, but I've got no other way, because that's how they've treated it. And we go back to the quote of Jeremiah.
Yes,
my favorite. I can't remember the exact words, but I think it's such a beautiful quote from Jeremiah, where he says, "It's not for man to guide his own steps, but it is obviously for God to guide the man's steps. It's not for man.
Right.
So if it's not for man, then who is it? Then it must be a messenger sent by God to guide man's steps." That's what he's saying, isn't it?
Yes, and I think people have this aversion to the word obey. It kind of triggers them to rebel, and this is, of course, the attribute of Satan. But look, when we're born into this world, we're completely helpless. And to be new at spirituality, or to walk the path of religion, the Sirat al-Mustaqim, it's not easy. Like we said, it's going against the current initially, and then finally you find your way, and then it's flowing back home to the destination. God almost draws you in, but the beginning requires a lot of patience and obedience. And that obedience is just as discipline. A child is obedient to their parent.
And it's discipline.
Like a baby relies on its mother for milk. It cannot do anything for itself. It needs its mother to change it. And the baby is compliant.
The baby is compliant. And if you're compliant, it works.
It has to be.
It works.
Yes.
And then you get nourished, you get stronger, your bones develop, you grow teeth, your mental acumen comes, and suddenly you can stand more on your own 2 feet.
Yes.
And what you have to understand is, through this obedience, the messenger of God allows you to be creative.
Exactly.
He wants you to be proactive. He wants to say to you now...
He wants you to be independent.
He wants you to be independent.
Eventually, yes.
He wants you to stand on your own 2 feet. And he's saying, now that I can see that you're growing spiritually, that you're maturing, now you can take the responsibility. But if I give you the responsibility of managing your own affairs when you're walking around blind, you're going to get run over by a car very immediately. And that is the great warning that is happening, and that's why society is on that direct path to self-destruction.
It is perfectly said, James. It's that type of obedience that God's Caliph commands, which is, don't go sticking your finger into that electrical socket, right? If you do it, it's going to be very bad for you. It's not the type of obedience that you are to wake up at 7:44 a.m. and then you are to brush your teeth at 7:45 a.m. and then 7:46 a.m. I expect
a battery cell.
Yes.
It's not to say you're a battery cell that just plugs into a system and you don't think for yourselves.
Yes.
It's to develop the wisdom to know what is right from wrong, because you just don't know sometimes.
Yes.
And when we do that, when we...
Obedience is us removing the umbrella so that God can allow it to rain on that vineyard that produces the crops that then eventually feeds the soul.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's God's Caliph telling us, look, obey me by refraining from doing this, and if you refrain from doing this and you do this instead, you will produce fruit as I do. You will become connected to me. It is that quote of Jesus, which is my favorite from the Gospels, which says that those who are within me and I am within them, they will bear the fruit. It's like
exactly. They are like the grapes from that vineyard.
Exactly.
So when you have the branches, you branch out from that vine. They are the branches of the vine.
Exactly.
And,
I am the tree and you are the branches.
You are the tree and you are the branches of that vine. So that's a very beautiful analogy.
It is.
And that is freedom in the end. because then you are working by that principle, and you have that creative energy now to do many things and explore through God's kingdom. Because God's kingdom is vast and it's full of knowledge, it's full of wisdom. You know, you can become a polymath again and explore the nature of the true physics of life, the true understanding of the true chemistry of life, the true biology of life. But you can't do any of that if you're doing it on a false-based premise, that you don't have the divine wisdom to back it up.
Yes. And coming from a Pakistani family, James, one of the proudest things that my parents could have witnessed was me graduating from university. It was a big deal for them. And because they were happy that now our son is independent. He has been studying in education since 25 years of age. Now he's 25. Now at least he can go and make his own way in the world. It is the same with God. If you are in class, you're in school, you're going from grade to grade, well, you have to be educated. You have to obey the teacher in order to learn from the teacher. But what the teacher really wants is for you to graduate and become your own, the best version of your own self. And if you don't make the grade, you have to repeat the year.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? But ultimately the goal is, like you said, James, is to be free, and we all seek that freedom.
Freedom, yeah, but the book is never sufficient alone, especially as we know.
And God is free and loves freedom.
And loves freedom.
This is AsyLex's word. Then doesn't God want for his children what he wants for himself?
Exactly.
Every parent wants their child to supersede them, to excel them. Actually, this is the desire that every parent has in their heart.
It is.
And God loves us 70 times more than our mother, so what does he want for us?
Exactly. So it's very beautiful, and once again I'll say that the book itself can never be sufficient. You know, we have so many scriptures, and like a manual to fixing a car, and as a car mechanic, you give me that manual, someone like me, I'm not going to have a clue what to do. But if you give me a teacher, a mechanic, who knows the nuts and bolts, and I train under him, I'm sure with effort, like Alexander the Great said, nothing is impossible to those that try. I could become a good mechanic. But if I just took the manual on my own and I started driving the car, it's going to be a write-off before it's even hit the streets.
As you always say, James, indeed. Good. Okay, so I think let's go to our last segment. We have some comments, James, that I think you'll find interesting, and they're all to do with the episode of the cornerstone or the black stone.
Oh my cornerstone.
And I think it's going to, it started with the cornerstone, let's end it with the cornerstone. Okay. Let's bring up our first comment, please. Would you like to read that, or should I go ahead?
Yeah, I think it's okay. So we have a comment here from Sama, I think it is.
Yes, Sama al-Hosuna.
Good. And she says herself, I'm unable to express this episode is great. So great start, obviously. Can you imagine that there are millions of people who follow a religion and perform acts of worship and leave the essence, which is something I always reflect on, of religion behind them? Imagine that I prostrate towards a black stone and leave its personality behind me. And worse, I fight him. I hope that all people understand. She said it again. Repeat, understand, read, and take a real stand against everything that is going on now.
Yes, very powerful comment. Thank you for that, Sister Sama. And you can see that in it she is telling people to really contemplate on it, because in the books of narrations of Sunnis and Shia, the main two kind of branches of Islam that exist in the world today, they have narrations that state that the black stone was actually an angel in paradise who then came down with Adam. This is in the books of narrations, narrations of the Prophet Muhammad, who explained the importance of this black stone.
And not to stumble over it.
And not to stumble over it.
Because if you stumble over the black stone, or you reject the cornerstone that is mighty in our eyes, as the builders have done, maybe the builders of this material world, then you are rejecting the spirit of truth. Because that's what it truly represents.
Well, Sister Sama says, doesn't she? She says that people need to realize that this stone has the personality behind it.
The personality.
Why are we not looking into who this angel is? The angel of the covenant of God.
The angel of the covenant, and we know that the covenant angel is ultimately the seventh covenant, the final covenant, the Metatron symbol, perhaps.
Metatron's cube, Kaaba. It's all connected.
And he is the only one to form the correct. I mean, look at that cube. Who else can put it together? It looks isometric. It looks beyond. The detail of the geometry is so profound and so divine that it needs that divine manager to do it. And without it, we've got this messed up world.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. Well, yeah, we completely agree with what you're saying, sister. I think it's really important that people should reflect on their religion. They should look into these esoteric aspects of religion to explain the apparent, right?
For me, it's so beautiful when we look into the metaphysics and we can see how it might overlay and onto this world. We see something very profound, and we see that that cannot be done based on a material rhetoric. You can get great builders of cities like the Canaanites were in the origins. Some of those people that were building Tubal-Cain or whatever, building these great cities, but they just had something lacking.
Something missing.
Something lacking that is key ingredient, that spirit.
Yes.
That cornerstone.
I remember when I was a very young child, James, I asked the question. I said, what is up with this black stone, and why are we like prostrating and kissing it? What's going on here? Why do we have to do this? It's a stone. And then my mother explained, no. This is a stone that was, it comes from paradise. And it's a remnant of paradise on earth. You see, so even, and all Muslims will tell you, Sunni, Shia, whatever denomination they come from, they'll tell you that this is a stone that came from the heavens. And it was sent on earth, and the Prophet Muhammad venerated it for a reason. But of course, now we know that the stone is that angel that the narrations of the Ahlul Bayt mention, and it is that cornerstone that Jesus Jesus Christ mentions in the parable of the tenants. So
beautiful.
It is a beautiful thing. Now let's go to our, I think we can take one more comment maybe before we wrap up for this morning, James. Let's bring it up and see what we have.
So, who do we have here? What's the name there, Doctor?
It's it's a very interesting name. Let's say let me try. At MH Madihari.
Madihari, yeah. It sounds
93.
almost Indian to me, but
Hello.
I don't know. And it says here...
Season's greetings.
Very beautiful.
Yes.
Many questions answered. No excuses. Here we go. No excuses. We must find a way to do pilgrimage before this whole thing falls apart.
Couldn't agree with you more.
So it seems like they're talking about the aspect of this dunya life, this worldly life, that it is close to meltdown. They say World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. You know, in other words,
if World War III takes place, absolutely.
We're not saying it will or it has.
I think all the
in essence,
signs are there, aren't they?
All the signs are there. We are in the apocalypse.
Wars and rumors of wars from the pandemic days.
From the pandemic days. So we see that this is a very true statement. And in essence, we've got the narrations as well, that it says, come to the Qaim as if crawling over ice. And even if you're locked in a box, break out of it. And it means, in essence, whatever happens to you, be prepared and determined to reach. Because once you reach, you will be amazed. And in essence, being a stone in the hand of the Qaim, being a bricklayer in the hand of the Qaim, you know, it's a great gift and a great blessing to have.
Yes.
And you know that obviously a beehive, to it functioning, the queen needs, what's the point of the queen having a hive? She needs bees. She needs worker bees.
Absolutely.
The queen bee is a genius. She knows how to release the right pheromones and to create the right context for the hive to function properly, but she needs workers.
Absolutely. The worker bees need to be there, and they are slowly gathering. And that comment is very heartening because it demonstrates that the matter of the riser of the family of Muhammad is very clear. There are no more excuses. AsyLex has made his argument very plain. He has called people to look into and research his claims, and he is now telling people the secrets of their religion in a way that makes sense to them, using their own books, their own books of hadith, their own scripture, and he is also pointing out that which was always in front of us but we could never see because we didn't know the Caliph of God. But now that we do know who he is, it is that moment just before the first water falls down from the heavens, before the great deluge, as in the flood of Prophet Noah. And in this day and age, that flood could come in the form of blood, perhaps as a World War III scenario, where you mentioned that Einsteinian quote where he said that if there is a third world war, the fourth one will be fought with sticks and stones, saying that we have now weapons of extreme mass destruction that can set us back hundreds of years. So
exactly.
It's not something we want, it's not something we call for. We're not one of those people who are saying let's create war so that we can usher in a new age with the Mahdi and Jesus returning to create the divine just state. We don't want that. We want people to recognize him now, and now begin laying the first brick, that foundation upon which the cornerstone is laid and the divine just state happens.
Yes,
James,
Doctor.
anything further to add?
I was just going to say, like, when we go back to the concept, as you mentioned, Noah, at
Yes.
the time of Noah, the people were busy marrying, they were busy making merriment, and they were so distracted.
Exactly.
And in fact, they were facing the dunya and not the hereafter. But in more terms, more importantly, they weren't recognizing God's supremacy. And when we don't, this is the pitfalls that we fall into. And there's a beautiful verse in the Quran I often reflect on, which is corruption has appeared in the lands and seas
On the hands
of what the hands of men have
have
wrought.
wrought.
They taste the punishment. So the punishment from God is not because he wants to punish us, because we are turning away from him. And he wants to wake us up.
He does.
He is that kind father that's harsh with us and doesn't want us to get run over in the road.
Exactly.
So he's warning us to come back to him. And then he is saying, if you come back to him, at least they might return. He wants them to return, like the prodigal son.
Yes.
Be like the prodigal son. God loves the prodigal son.
Let's return back home to the Father, to the Son, and let's turn away from the evil tenants who have occupied his land. So thank you very much for joining us this morning. It was a great pleasure to have you on. James, thank you for your thoughts and reflections.
Thank you, Doctor.
We hope to be back on Sunday morning. And until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be with you all.
Assalamu alaikum. God bless you all.